What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review the season finale of The Terror, an episode called We Are Gone. This show is based on the 2007 best-selling novel by Dan Simmons, and I have to say thank you for all the people who recommended Dan Simmons novels when I did my mid-season review a couple episodes back. I'm embarrassed to admit that I've never read any of Dan Simmons' work, but if this season of The Terror is any indication of what to expect, I definitely need to devour some of his novels, because The Terror, I think, was absolutely sensational. For people who have a taste for nautical adventure stories, survival stories, tales of high adventure, with a dash of supernatural or horror, I think The Terror is required viewing. There's a very strong chance at the end of this year that The Terror might end up being my favorite show in hindsight. But what's cool about this show is that it's basically a fictionalized account of what might have happened to the crews of the Terror and the Erebus when they disappeared in the late 1840s. Captain Sir John Franklin was searching for the Northwest Passage. These two ships were the most technologically advanced ships of their day. They are packed to the brim with all the resources they could ever hope to have, as well as soldiers and scientists and medicine and doctors. They're basically prepared for anything except for what happens to them over the course of the 4 years of this adventure story. My only real grievance against this show is the strange release strategy, which I think worked to the disadvantage of people in the United States. The show was released in its entirety in basically every single country in the world except for Canada, the UK, and America, but in that we are the bulk of the English-speaking audience, that seems to be a bit backwards. And ultimately, it's AMC who lost out on that equation, because AMC obviously wants a lot of eyeballs watching their show on their channel at the designated time. But with a show as interesting as this, it didn't take very long at all before it started getting posted illegally all over the place, because the show had already been made available in so many other countries. So I feel a little sorry for AMC that they've lost out on that traffic, and maybe they will revisit that strategy before they do something like that in the future. But by the time our characters get to episode 10, they've been through so much misery and so much heartache and so much suffering, you almost feel like you've been out there with them. Because in addition to the unimaginable cold and being trapped in ice for several years and being forced to live off a diet of spoiled food because it was improperly canned initially at the factory, resulting in scurvy and madness and paranoia, you also have this supernatural creature, the Toonbach, which is basically a giant polar bear with godlike intelligence that is systematically eliminating these soldiers. We basically see a cast of hundreds get reduced down to a very, very small cast, basically a cast of one by the end of the story. And there were times where the show was genuinely hard to watch, because as mutinies begin to unfold and the men turn on each other, this show exposes us to some horrific brutalities, some unimaginable violence, and some of the most disgusting cannibalism that's ever been committed to a screen of any size. Yesterday I was playing a little catch-up with episodes 6 through 9 in order to get prepared for tonight, and one of the lines that stuck with me, that's been kind of haunting me, is when one character is describing his lingering feelings after having been exposed to watching many of his friends burning alive, because while everybody's trying to escape this fire and while everybody's trying to basically to survive, this one particular character, he's so hungry that the smell of burning humans has basically gotten stuck in his nostrils, and not in a repulsive way. He can't stop thinking about the smell of grease and how delicious his friends smelled as they were burning. Because this expedition was never supposed to take as long as it does, and like all the lemon juice they've been keeping on the ship in order to prevent scurvy, it no longer has any impact. And most of the men just start to have this haunted, hollow-eyed expression on their face, just desperately seeking nutrition of some kind from some source. And this show spares us no details as scurvy kicks in. I mean, you start seeing teeth falling out, you start seeing these unsightly bruises appearing on people. One of the main characters, Fitzjames, he has injuries from 6 years prior where he was shot, and the scar tissue from where he was injured just starts to turn into these open holes in his body that are constantly leaking blood. I even had a bit of a surreal out-of-body experience at one point. One of the characters is noticing that along his scalp line, he's starting just to bleed through the holes in his skin. And at that precise moment, I had a spontaneous nosebleed. And it was just one of those random just eruptions, just a true gusher. So I'm sitting here trying to prevent blood from getting all over my desk, and I'm covering up my nose, and I'm watching all this horrific imagery on screen. It was just a little bit overwhelming. But I mentioned this before in my mid-season recap. The overall atmosphere, style, and tone of the story reminded me quite a bit of the chapter in Bram Stoker's Dracula where we see the last voyage of the Demeter. It's a great piece of the book where, through a series of journal entries, we see what happens over time as a crew just disintegrates into madness as Dracula is hunting them at night, one at a time. But the brilliance of this show is that as much as it is a supernatural horror story, In the end, it's more of a gripping military drama about a mutiny that results in a bunch of cannibalistic madmen running amok and needing to be put down. Jared Harris is absolutely incredible in this show as Captain Francis Crozier, but he finds himself increasingly outmaneuvered and outnumbered by people who are loyal to this madman named Hickey. Everybody has their own ideas about what's the best way to survive. Eventually, they decide they need to leave the ships behind and just with these horrible wooden sleds, just drag them over hundreds of miles of rock, hoping to be rescued. And a year earlier, they actually did send some people on the very same mission to come back with help and resources and additional ships. But 18 miles into their journey, they find all those people dead. But adding to the confusion is the suspicion that the local indigenous people in the area might be responsible for this horrible creature that's attacking them. Some people have tried to engage in a general cultural exchange and learning the language, and they think that the natives actually might be their best case at finding a consistent food supply that'll allow them to survive in the journey south, now that their canned food is basically going to kill them. I mean, I will never look at canned food ever again. There's something so disgusting about the canned food in the show, and when they open it up, just got this like layer of like mold and grease and mildew on the top. But now I think I'll have to push down some bile anytime I see somebody opening up a can of soup of any kind. But as we get into episode 10, the big debate is, are they justified in eating and or murdering their sick, helpless friends in order to survive? Because as they're heading south, more and more people are just collapsing from scurvy, and the scurvy is so bad, even if they get put in one of the sleds, it's just pure white-hot agony for them just to be bumping over the rocks, because as scurvy sets in inside your joints, you start to feel like you have little chunks of broken glass. I mean, every movement is just pure agony. So do you stop and wait for them to die, or do you leave them behind with some food? Like, what is the ethical move to make? And Hickey and Crozier have very different ideas. As far as Hickey is concerned, once you're either close to death and or dead, you are fuel for the surviving members. And in his madness, he even murders the natives that are willing to offer them some seal meat. But we also learn toward the end of episode 9 that because of the men marching across land, they're scaring away all the game. So even the natives are going to have a hard time eating now. And so Silence, kind of the emissary that's been going back and forth between the two cultures, she needs to bring Tumbach back one last time to balance things. There's one absolutely horrific scene when, during the trial of Hickey, either in episode 8 or episode 9, this creature attacks, and we get these beautiful long camera moves where the camera's basically going in and out of the camp as we're seeing this creature like bite the heads off the tops of people, or just feasting on their insides. When it comes to just raw, pure filmmaking technique, this show just holds nothing back. The photography, the music, the writing, the acting, everything is first rate. You feel like you're watching almost like a David Lean movie, or at the very least, something on the level of Peter Weir's Master and Commander. But punctuating all this horrible misery, you do have these beautiful, heartwarming moments. There's a character by the name of Blankley who lost his leg fighting the creature in episode 5, I believe. And he's been walking around on a wooden leg ever since, but we see toward the end of episode 9 that his leg is starting to gangrene and rot where his flesh connects with the wooden leg. And it's just absolutely foul seeing all that rot moving up his thigh. But he, in a kind of deliriously comical moment, covers his body in forks because he knows he's going to be food, and marches out toward this ice in order to sacrifice himself in order to buy his friends some time. And ironically, he ends up finding the Northwest Passage and marks it on his map before the creature comes and eats him. But the gist of episode 10 and the season finale, and I realize I've been talking for quite a while now without actually getting to this episode, Captain Crozier being captured by Hickey's camp, and Crozier's men basically turning coward on him and refusing to mount a rescue attempt. So we have Crozier at the mercy of Hickey and his team of psychos, as well as Dr. Goodsir, who has so far refused to eat any human flesh. And we get this really grim, depressing scene as Goodsir basically explains to Crozier, at some point Hickey's going to either kill you or make you eat human flesh as a test of loyalty. He's like, and he says, I'm not going to make it. So when he tests you by trying to make you eat me, he gives him some very cryptic advice about only eating flesh from his feet, specifically the soles of his feet. During the night, Goodsir chugs a bunch of poison, but he slashes his wrists to make it look as if he's dying from bleeding out. And the following day, we get by far the grossest scene all season, where Crozier gets up, walks outside, and Hickey and his men have prepared a meal, and we see that Goodsir is laid on a slab, completely nude, with a whole bunch of chunks of meat carved out of his ass and thigh. I mean, the special effects in this show were absolutely incredible. I mean, I've never necessarily felt an urge to eat human flesh, but I don't think I'll ever look at somebody's thighs and butts quite the same way again after seeing this particularly gross scene. But very wisely, Crozier does carve a little bit of the dead skin off the bottom of the man's feet in order to prove that he's willing to eat human flesh. flesh, which serves him very well in the upcoming battle with the Tunbach, because right as this creature is marching in to attack, everybody starts doubling over. They're basically puking up blood. The poison that Good Sir ingested is having the desired effect on all of Hickey's deranged soldiers. And this creature just starts mopping the floor with them. It's an absolutely ruthless battle. However, because all the men are chained together and there's so much poison in their system, even the Tunbach, which basically looks like he could eat like a buffalo whole, as he's swallowing all the poison flesh in addition to the chains, he actually does start getting choked up and blocked up, and the Tunbach successfully gets destroyed. Hickey at one point tries to make a ritual sacrifice to keep the creature at bay by hacking off his own tongue, which ties back to the myths and legends surrounding the creature, but the Tunbach is not interested in a sacrifice at all and literally just rips Hickey in two. But after all the atrocities committed by Hickey, it actually was a very, very satisfying moment, watching it completely obliterated by this mythological beast. So in the aftermath, the show kind of eases into a nice satisfactory conclusion. Silence returns and she finds Crozier. She's unable to free him from the chain, so she lops off one of his hands, and Crozier settles in to live with these natives. He lives with them for a couple of years, and finally some people from Britain come looking for him. And we get this interesting scene which serves as a bit of a framing device, because the very first episode of the season opened up in 1850 with these Brits looking for Crozier and talking to the natives, wondering if there are any messages, have they seen any survivors? And we see that here they are in 1850 with Crozier in disguise, sitting outside of the tent, listening to the conversation. And the message was basically, get the hell out of here. We're all gone. We're all dead. Don't stay here. You don't belong here. And as Crozier pointed out very early in the season, this is an environment that wants them dead. So as a sucker for tales of high adventure, as a sucker for horror, I could not have been more satisfied with this show. They definitely classed it up. Incredible acting. And I've definitely made up my mind to stop screwing around and actually read some of Dan Simmons' books. I've been looking at those covers of those books, Hyperion, since I was like a teenager, thinking the covers looked amazing. But from what I understand, he's got about a dozen novels that are absolutely required reading. Hopefully AMC will continue to make deals with them and dust off some of his old material if they're able to give us shows as strong as this one. So irrespective of the Golden Globes and the Emmys and all the award shows, for my money, The Terror is one of the best shows I expect to see all year. So thanks again for all the people who comment on my channel, who recommend that I have a look. You were 100% correct. Keep those suggestions coming. I always appreciate it. But if you enjoyed my recap and review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. You can always hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk more, or just leave a comment in the comments below. Sadly, there are no more episodes of The Terror to review, but I'll be back later this week to review new episodes of Legion, The Expanse, etc. But until my next video, as always, onwards and upwards.